Hello and welcome to the SCI Guys, the show where we talk about the crazy, weird, and wonderful stories from the science world. I'm Corey, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host, Luke Cutforth,
Hello.
And special guest, Tom Scott.
Hey! Hello!
This week, we're talking about language learning and speaking science. But first, we have a YouTube comment to go through.
Do we now?
We do. This YouTube comment is from over a year ago, and it says, "It's year 2021. I'm still hopeful there will be an episode with Tom Scott. Episode on linguistics would be perfect." Just saying.
Look at that! Manifestation.
Yeah, I mean, congrats to Dio Valenti for seeing this.
Yeah.
Well done. And thank you, Tom, for joining us.
Well, thanks for having me on. This is where I put the warning at the start that it's been, 15 years or more since I graduated from linguistics. So, my knowledge is out of date. And what I got out of that degree was a few good anecdotes. This many years later, can't actually remember that much of it. So, any linguists listening, I apologise.
Great, so we don't have a single expert here. Good, just the way we like it.
Well, it's important because the distinction between being an expert in something and having a degree in something.
Yes.
And a degree that I got 15 years ago and have since then been doing, IT stuff and then YouTube stuff. I don't want to claim I'm an expert in linguistics. I have some knowledge about linguistics, definitely not an expert.
Oh, I get you. I did my degree about 4 years ago, and YouTube has pushed almost all of that knowledge out of my brain.
Yeah,
and I'm doing a science
don't know
podcast.
anything anymore.
Yeah, I don't know.
But you're really good at optimizing titles and thumbnails.
Exactly. So I also want to ask a question to everyone, which I should have asked before already. How many languages do you speak? Which languages do you speak? Answer it down in the comments. If you're listening on Apple or on Spotify, get to the YouTube comments and answer that, please. Or
Je parle dos.
You parley barely won.
Je parle seulement un petit peu de français, but I've got English, I've got American, I've got Australian, Canadian at a push. Beyond that,
very good.
It's not great.
Yeah, all of the world languages, really.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Well, okay, so you're not entirely wrong there because there is international English, which is a kind of limited vocabulary English that is sort of that international trade standard. Anything more than that I'd have to go quickly look up, but I'm pretty sure there is kind of this international standard subset of English that's pretty much anywhere in the world, if you're talking about commerce, you should be able to get through with this subset of the language.
Super interesting.
That's amazing.
Like a standardized English.
Yeah, and as not formally standardized.
Okay.
There's no big group in charge, but it's just the words that if you're talking international trade, those are the words that got picked.
Okay, I have a quick anecdote on this, and it infuriates me to no end. So, in business, in what would probably be international business English, there is a phrase called the grey pound. And the grey pound is to do with...
I've got 3 really inappropriate jokes already. Carry on.
Sorry, Tom, would you like to share any of your really inappropriate...
No, you know what? The audience can fill those in on autocomplete. You know the jokes I'm going to make. We don't need to make them.
Okay, well, dirty jokes aside, there's this idea called the grey pound, right? Which is used to denote old people money, basically. Mm-hmm. So, Colin Firth movies are targeting the grey pound. At least they are now. World War II movies are targeting the grey pound.
Racism
Other people
against Meghan Markle is targeting the grey pound.
Yeah, actually, probably. Yeah, there's probably a subset of tabloid newspapers that are targeting primarily the grey pound. Anyway, but there's also a phrase in business, probably in standard business English, called the pink pound, which is for LGBT money. And not only is that a massive sort of preconception that anyone LGBT is identified with effeminate things or with pink things, it's also not called the gay pound. It should be called the gay pound.
The gay pound opens up a whole host of other very dirty jokes. So I feel like there's a reason that's been avoided.
I'm clearly talking to two people younger than me here, because you're not at all offended by the old people being called grey, despite the colour of my hair.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, fair enough.
You know what? I think we should just move past this so as not to offend anyone else. No, but seriously, pink actually is used to mean gay in a lot of contexts.
Right.
Pink is just the gay color now.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's move on.
It used to be the boy colour.
It did used to be the boy colour, but things change. And speaking of changing, we're changing the topic back to linguistics. I mean, well, back to what I want to talk about in regards to linguistics. I've got a question for both of you. I feel like Tom might be more geared to answer this question. So, Luke, I'm going to pose it to you first.
Oh, okay then.
What is linguistics?
I would say linguistics is the study of probably verbal communication between Homo sapiens. I'm trying to make it sciencey.
Yeah, okay. So what I've got here is that linguistics is the study of language. Is that about right, Tom?
Yeah, I've heard it described as the study of everything to do with language, apart from what people make with it. So it's not the study of literature, it's not the study of artworks, it's a study of everything from how the brain processes language, to how our vocal folds create sounds, to everything in between. It's everything to do with language apart from the actual what it's used for.
You know what, Corey?
Yeah.
He was much better at answering that, so you were right.
And I also hedge my bets by saying I've heard it described as.
I'm going to say that before everything I ever say on this podcast.
Yeah, what do you think I do?
Okay.
Basically, apparently, you got to use words that just, separate you from all the things that you say.
That's one way of getting around libel laws, yeah.
That's someone who spent way too long on Twitter.
Yeah, except my tactic on Twitter is mostly just say really controversial things and then log off.
Yeah.
That's it. I love that. Just creating chaos.
I just
and
left
leaving.
it a couple of years ago. So this is an example. Like linguistics would be how things are phrased, how people are defensive on there, how the psychology of it is affected. It's not analysing tweets for content or it's a use versus appearance distinction. So it's not analysing Shakespeare or analysing tweets. It's analysing, okay, well, in that case, that exclamation mark is doing that. That word is structured like this. I think the best example I've got is a friend of mine who helped write some videos on linguistics a while back is Gretchen McCulloch. And she's basically the internet's favourite linguist. She wrote the book on internet language. It's called Because Internet. And it's this wonderful selection of, this is how people speak on Tumblr. This is how people speak on Twitter. This is why your grandparents end text messages with really passive-aggressive seeming ...
My dad does that all the time. It's not just grandpa.
Right.
Why does he do that? Do you remember why? It's like everything has to be thought about.
It's roughly equivalent to an accent. It's roughly equivalent to how any language changes over time. It's just in this case, it's visual. It's the same distinction between someone a couple of generations older might say, thank you, you're welcome. Someone more or less our age would probably say, thank you, oh, no problem. No worries.
And people from
that same kind of expectation change.
And people from older generations find no problem more rude than you're welcome, generally.
Yeah, whereas it's flipped if you're younger.
Yeah, exactly. So if you're like, no problem, you're like, an older person might be like, oh, that's quite rude. Say you're welcome, say it properly. In the same sense, when an older person does an ellipsis, or what I hate even more than that is not a full ellipsis, just 2 dots. 2 full stops. That winds me up because I'm like, what are you saying to me? What are you trying to imply?
That
what
is
the
not
hidden meaning
a punctuation. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
I have an American friend who, if ever you thank him for something, he goes, yeah. And
even that.
No.
The first thing you're taught if you study linguistics, the very first thing, is that you should never put a value judgment on how people use language. Like there can be standard, there can be non-standard. You can say, oh yeah, this is how formal academic English is usually written, but you don't say that is better. And that's called descriptivism over prescriptivism. You say how it is, you say not how it should be. As an example, I just said, you say not how it should be. That's not standard. Do I care about it? Absolutely not. And then you get that thing of someone saying, yeah, thank you, yeah. And there's always that problem going, oh, I don't like that.
Yeah.
For all the descriptivism that gets drilled into you time and time again when you study this, there's always going to be something where you go, oh, I don't like that.
This is the thing. Language is obviously just a thing that is constantly evolving, right? When we're studying it, we shouldn't be, as you've said, Tom, we shouldn't be saying this is how language is. If you break the rules, you're doing language wrong. There is no wrong way to do language because it's just how we're communicating with each other. Obviously, it's more complex than that. We'll get into what language is in a
there's
sec.
a wrong context to use
Stop
language
that.
in. You don't go up to the Queen and go, hey, what's up? Like there's you know, depending on what point in history you did that, either you're being thrown out of Buckingham Palace or you're losing your head. So, like, there are clearly incorrect ways to use language, but from an analysis perspective, you don't put a value judgment on that.
Yeah, I once met Prince Charles, and we spent more time being educated.
Sorry, I'm just to pick up that name that just.
Sorry, it's quite a heavy name, so you might not be able to lift it. We spent more time being told how to talk to Prince Charles than we actually spent with Prince Charles.
Yet, when you came back from meeting Prince Charles, the only thing that you could talk about. Do you remember?
Say it. Don't say it. Don't say it.
Say it.
It was his big sausage fingers. It was like shaking hands with an actual packet of sausages. I'm never getting an OBE.
No, I don't think so. I don't think so. Shall we get back to linguistics?
Yeah, sorry.
So I know I'm enjoying the diversion about Prince Charles' sausage fingers.
I've actually got another anecdote about Prince Charles, which I would like to tell you, but not on pod.
I mean, more than that, like, I want to know how you were told to talk to Prince Charles. Like, what's the briefing you get? Because that means that pretty much everyone Prince Charles talks to has had a briefing on how to interact with it.
Yeah, he lives in like a parallel universe where everyone just talks to him like that because he doesn't see the conversation happen.
Yeah, it's like living in it's easily like living in a parallel universe, isn't it? You never actually truly interact with someone.
Well, it was many years ago, but it was basically just to do with I think it was to do with like you don't talk to him until he talks to you. It was the way of referring to him. So it's like the first time he speaks to you, you say Your Highness, and then after that you can then not use that. It was stuff like that. I can't remember. It was several years ago now, but it was that sort of briefing of the etiquette, basically. And I think it pretty much went out the window as soon as he arrived.
It's a bit silly though, isn't it? It's a bit silly. You got to speak to this one person in this very, very specific way.
Yeah.
Well, that's true of a lot of authority figures. That's true of judges in courtrooms. That's true of a lot of people, that if you use the wrong tone with the wrong person, it's not going to end well for you.
Yeah.
It just seems a bit weird when, it's one bloke who's great whatever grandfather was chosen by God.
Yeah, it's like, a judge has a job and you have to respect them because of the work that they do. A royal has a famous parent and you have to respect them because their mummy or daddy is very famous.
Yeah, like Brooklyn Beckham.
Stop. I wasn't going to say it.
You have to pay attention to his cooking. And his basically book of Instagram pictures because he has a famous daddy.
Why do we have to pay attention to you? Oh, well, the parent link in my Wikipedia article is blue.
Immediately disregard. So the University of California, Los Angeles, I think that's what it is, UCLA, let's say, they say that linguistics is the scientific study of language, and linguists are experts in linguistics, work on specific languages, but their primary goal is to understand the nature of language in general by asking questions such as what distinguishes human language from other animal communication systems, what features are common in all human languages, how are modes of linguistic communication, speech, writing, sign language related to each other. So that kind of gives you an overview of what linguistics is, right? Mm-hmm. It's the study of language. I mean, Tom put it very succinctly. Tom put it very well. We don't even need the UCLA.
I rambled for a while there.
So it's multidisciplinary.
Sorry, there's an entire linguistics paper being written right now about exactly why that's difficult to say. Multidisciplinary. There we go. I feel like there should be an extra syllable in there.
Right. It doesn't sound right.
Right. So this is where linguistics brain goes into action. Yeah. Why doesn't it sound right? Because a lot of discoveries, a lot of theories in linguistics have been from moments like this of a linguist who's had the training going, hang on, why is that? So you look at the word multidisciplinary. It feels like there should be another syllable in there, right?
Yeah.
It feels like it should be multidisciplinary So I think it's the emphasis. Gut reaction on that is that the stress feels like it should be in a different place. So you've got multi, emphasis on the mul, so you're on syllable. Sorry, I'm doing this in my head now. You'll need to edit this down. All right, say it one more time.
Well, can I just say what I think it is that you're both...
Yeah.
You're putting the emphasis on the C. The emphasis should be on the N. So you both said multidisciplinary. You basically said scenary.
Yeah.
It should be multidisciplinary.
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 No, that sounds
Yeah, but
worse
you
to
say
me.
discipline. Discipline.
And that's the reason. That's your reason.
We did it.
Because you're used to hearing if you're pulled into a meeting at work to be told off, it's a disciplinary, right?
Yeah.
And then you've got to do multi. I think you land the emphasis on the second syllable. Does that feel right? Multi.
Multi. I say
No, it's
multi.
on the
first
mul.
syllable.
It's on the
It's
mul.
on the first. It's on the first, right? So multidisciplinary. Discipline. So you got to land on the first and multidisciplinary. You got to land on the first and fifth syllable of a 7-syllable word, and I think that's just really confusing because you've got that long string of unstressed syllables in the middle.
It is really difficult.
I still think it's multidisciplinary.
Yeah, no, you're not wrong. I just find it really difficult to say.
I would say multidisciplinary.
Multidisciplinary.
See, I would say you got 3 stresses. Disciplinary. Multidisciplinary.
See, I feel like that's what I'm trying to do, and
Yeah.
I'm losing it. Especially because when words are that long, I don't read them. I just kind of let my brain fill in the blanks. I'm like, I know roughly what's there, right? I'll get it, and I can't get that one. I can't.
Well, good chat.
But yeah, it's an emphasis thing. So you could probably get a small linguistics paper out of that as people try and work out what sounds not correct, what sounds natural, what sounds wrong. I'm trying to avoid value judgments there, but that tripped us up somehow. And yeah, there's a whole analysis to be done on stress patterns and things like that.
So interesting.
I'm getting very stressed from this.
Hey!
No, but I think that's interesting. This is really, really good. We've actually done like a little sort of insight into actual linguistics through my mess up of one very, very difficult word.
We've done like the first bit of the paper.
If you're friends with linguists and you stumble repeatedly over a word, it will just get dissected for a long while people try and work out. You know what?
Thank goodness none of us are linguists, Tom.
Yep.
And this is why linguists
gonna drink some water and shut up.
No, so we've got it. We know that it's multidisciplinary. There we go. But what does that mean? What I mean by that is that there's a lot of overlap with other sort of areas of science. So you'll see a lot of overlap between linguistics and life sciences, social sciences, humanities, even things like AI research, because language is everywhere. You cannot escape it. Even sort of, I did in high school a look into the Stroop Effect. Do you know what the Stroop Effect is? Either of you? Well, Tom, you're nodding your head. You know what it is. Luke, do you know what it is?
Yeah, I realise that this is an audio podcast, so nodding my head was entirely useless there. Do you want 5 minutes on non-verbal communication, how Zoom calls have affected it over the pandemic? Because there's a lot of papers about that now.
There are. Oh my god, there are so many. Like when I was looking, there are so many papers that I was like, oh, what can I focus on? I could not find something to focus on that gave you a good scope of all of linguistics because it's so broad and there are so many sort of very individual areas of study. It's very hard to sort of encapsulate it.
The bit that fascinated me was actually what we just demonstrated there, which is turn-taking over a laggy video call. If you've got a 200 millisecond
That's
gap,
really interesting because... Sorry.
Hey! There we go. There's a whole set of non-verbal behaviours and turn-taking things that have evolved since the world moved to using video calls a lot. Stroop Effect, yeah. This is what you end up with as a linguist. You end up with a lot of useless anecdotes that break conversations because people start thinking about how they're talking.
Sorry, Tom, that's the entire podcast.
Yeah, this is perfect. Yeah. Maybe we should just make this whole podcast about linguistics, right? Like that.
If you want to, Gretchen McCulloch does have a podcast called Lingthusiasm.
Yes, I've heard. I've listened to this.
Have you?
So good. Yes.
Amazing.
Stroop Effect is a psycholinguistics thing where the canonical demonstration is you see a word for a colour, but in a different colour.
Yeah.
And you have to say the colour it's in and not the word.
For example, you'll see, green written in pink ink, and you've got to say pink when you see that.
Yeah.
And
your brain automatically reads it.
Yeah, what you find is that it's really, really difficult for people to do that. So there's this sort of hesitation, this measurable hesitation when someone is asked to read it's called an incongruent sort of color word, where, green is written in pink and you've got to say pink. Whereas if you're just told to read the color that's written, so, read green instead of pink, that's much easier because your brain is kind of automatically just reading anything that it sees.
And what feels so interesting about that is that presumably, like, I mean, you may be able to correct me, Tom or Corey, as far as I remember it, our sort of general, because of the rate of evolution, we haven't changed too much since we sort of invented written language, or since written language became so prevalent. And so what's so interesting about that is that we've almost like we've got an automatic response, but that seems like more like it would be a trained response as opposed to a response that our brain would naturally do if we weren't able to read.
I don't know. Take this with a massive, massive grain of salt, because this is me trying to remember something I did for a high school project when I was not even 17. So massive grain of salt here. From what I remember, it is learned, but also your brain is very good at adapting to language. And because you learn it from such a young age, and it's sort of, it's just very ingrained in your brain, more so than sort of looking at a color and saying what that color is. I feel like I'm pretty sure we don't know specifically exactly why we see the effects, but we have some solid ideas. Basically, most of science. We don't know exactly why, but we got some idea, you know?
I mean, that's true of pretty much everything to do with the brain at this point. We do know from studies of brain-damaged patients that there is definitely a linguistic area, or a couple of linguistics areas in the brain. There is a language processing zone that is usually in the same place, as I understand it. More than that, I mean, at that point, you know, it is literally brain surgery to try and figure out any more than that.
I guess what I mean is that we have so you're saying, Tom, that we have a linguistics area of the brain, but we don't necessarily have a written words area of the brain. I would presume that something in our visual system is turning words into language, and then that's being passed to the language area of the brain. In the same way that we don't have an area of the brain that deals with the icons on a computer. We've created computers to work and interface with our visual systems. And it almost feels like, because written language, at least being as prevalent as it is a fairly new thing with the invention of the printing press and the invention of pens. And it wouldn't have been like several, like 10,000, 20,000, 30,000 years ago. I'm pulling numbers out my ass here. That we would have had loads and loads of language. It's almost like written language, like writing is an evolved way of using the circuitry that already exists in our brains, rather than, for example, spoken language is a part of our brain's hardware. Like we would evolve language if left on we evolve spoken language if left on an island with 20 people. We'd come up with a way of communicating, but we wouldn't necessarily start writing things down to each other. And we wouldn't necessarily invent computers with icons automatically, but we would come up with an audible version of language, or maybe a sign version of language.
We could come up with sort of signs to mean certain things, but it's when you start getting sort of the grammar and the specific syntax of, you know, how you put words together and how you build sentences, that it then sort of becomes language. Right?
I mean, you have just described the unethical experiment that every sort of advanced linguist would love to run at some point.
Yes.
You know, that we cannot test for things like that, barring a real-life disaster where a load of infants get marooned on an island and somehow survive.
Yeah.
We just can't know that.
If you think about it this way, right? If we look at, say, previous episodes that we've done on how people become cyborgs, right? And they, you know, the guy that had this sort of pad on his back instead of having eyes that saw things and went straight to his brain, he had a camera on his head that had this pad on his back that depressed these little sort of it pressed down on his back in particular ways whenever the camera sort of sensed something. And through that, he then gained sight through a camera on his head and a sort of mat of little, you know, pressure points on his back. So what I'm saying here is that your brain is able to adapt to different sort of inputs. And when it comes to written language, I think, and this is just me saying I think it's probably something somewhat similar, because obviously from the very start of your life, you're just being inundated with all of that information. So your brain is probably pretty bloody good at taking that in and understanding it in that particular way. In the same sense that if you were to take a kid, pop a camera on their head, stick a mat of sort of, you know, pressure points attached to the camera on their back, they'd probably start using that as almost not exactly equal to visual information, but it would be pretty up there in terms of the kid's brain.
And it wires round to the visual cortex.
Yeah.
The brain is an incredible pattern matching system. Psycholinguistics is one of the subfields of linguistics, and you'll find time and time again that people learning new, it doesn't even have to be a language, like learning Morse code. If you are starting to pick up the really high speed stuff, there are still people who do, competitive Morse code speed trials and things like that. And if they're listening at a particular speed, they're not hearing ... and then working that out in their head. They're hearing the patterns and just writing down as if you were translating from someone dictating to you and writing it down.
Wow.
So the form doesn't matter. The brain just pattern matches, and after a while you get used to hearing, okay, I know that's the. I know that's... And if someone sends you a word, or just nonsense characters, an acronym, something like that, you might have to slow down and think about it for a moment. The same as if I suddenly dropped a new flirm into the conversation, it'll short-circuit ever so slightly while your brain works out what I just said and tries to autocorrect it.
Like how I don't have a clue what the letter S is or the letter O is in Morse code, but I know that the thing from Nokia phones and the war means SOS.
Oh God! No. I've got to pedant you. I've got to pedant you.
Oh no!
That Nokia tone is ... which is SMS.
Oh,
that's smart.
Wow,
that's smart. Very
okay,
good.
well, like I said, I don't have a clue what S or O or M are in Morse code, and Tom has just live proven that.
So back to, I guess, linguistics.
Yeah, please.
I mean, I say back to linguistics. We're always talking about linguistics, but back to what I have written down on my note sheet in front of me.
Oh, good luck with that.
I just want to point out, we've kind of touched on this, but I want to say explicitly, spoken language is not the only sort of area that linguistics covers. Sign language is a language too. Well, I say sign language is a language too. Sign languages are languages too, and those are also studied by linguists.
I'm glad you pluralised that, because British Sign Language, American Sign Language, Auslan, they're all, I think they're all mutually incompatible. I think they share a few words, but certainly all the other international sign languages, no.
The one thing I think I know about ASL is that it's designed so that you can spell out the entire alphabet with one hand, whereas BSL, you need to use both hands to do the alphabet.
Yes.
So I feel like, I think ASL and BSL, you could kind of understand some of it, but I think you're right. I don't think someone that's someone that's signing ASL would be able to communicate with someone that's signing BSL.
There
smoothly.
is also, I think, I'm going to get the name wrong on this, something like signed English, which is a entirely different thing, which is English words and kind of roughly English grammar mapped to sign language, and that is not British Sign Language. The
I'd imagine
grammar
that's
is completely different.
I'd imagine that was something that was created by hearing people rather than...
I don't know, and I know it's a really sensitive subject, so I'm going to tread very carefully around it, but I know the grammar of sign languages that are not tagged to other languages can be wildly different. Like you can, I think there is somewhere you can use pronouns by signing an object or a person and then placing that in 3D space. So you essentially use the space in front of you as a stage, and you create, if there's going to be a conversation between two people and you're reporting what that was, you sign one person's name and you put them in space. And you sign the other person's name and you put them in space. And then you can gesture to those to say how the conversation was, as if you're putting on voices.
Oh, that's so interesting.
There are accents. There are regional variations. There are signs that have become taboo. Because it turns out that when the signs for certain ethnicities were created, those signs haven't aged well. There's signs that have changed over time because the community there have gone, maybe we shouldn't. So just like in spoken languages, you end up with words changing over time because of cultural changes.
It's so interesting. I feel like linguistics, I've already said it's multidisciplinary and said it's multidisciplinary.
That's how you say
and all
it.
of the
That
other
was
things.
right. However you nailed the emphasis on that one, that was it.
I was thinking so hard before I said that. All of my brain power was going to that.
Yeah.
But because it covers so many areas, I think it's really interesting to highlight different biases and whatnot that we might have, right? So for example, we're talking about, sign language changing over, or sign language is changing over time, the same as any other language we might look at, which is interesting and surprising, but also it shouldn't be, because it's a language. Of course it should. That makes complete sense. But it is surprising to us, and through that, it points out the bias that we have for the information that we receive.
And you also have spoken languages like French, where you have l'Académie Française, which is the governor of the language. They say what the words are and what is acceptable. And when something comes along like l'email, they say, no, it's I think it's courrier électronique or something like that. I'm mispronouncing that wildly. But they try to minimize loan words from other languages and come up with official French definitions that must be used for I think it must be used by government and should be used by media. I'm not sure, but it's still got a lot of weight.
I think in French Canada, is that how you say it, French Canada? I think in Canada, where they speak French, you can't have...
Go with Quebec. It'll always be Quebec.
I think, essentially, you've got to have company names be translated into French.
Oh, more than that. Quebec now has a language law that says you have a right to work in French and a right to be served in a shop in French. You can have other languages as well, but there is a requirement that any business, if hiring employees or interacting with the public, must give the option for French. Now, that's a really controversial law for many obvious reasons, but it's this defense of French culture, and specifically Quebecois French culture, in a country that could very easily slip over to default English.
It is really, again, I'm talking about how looking at linguistics and the study of language highlights all of these other areas, because then you come into the sort of political sort of mode of language. You've got that there. I mean, personally, you've got it with Scots, where there's the idea, is Scots a language? Is it a dialect? And, you've got Gaelic and Gaelic, and how those are sort of... not oppressed, but those are sort of like pushed out to the sides and not seen as sort of valid languages in a country that speaks almost entirely English. It's really interesting how this one sort of, I guess, generally overlooked field of science actually touches literally everything else. Like it's one of my favorite areas of science after having looked into it for this episode. It's just so interesting.
Did you see the Scots Wikipedia?
Oh my god, the Scot! Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Good.
Go for it. Go for it. Please explain.
No. I'm going to let the person who's actually got a connection to this explain this one to Luke. I'll get it wrong.
I mean, as far as I'm aware, there was a Wikipedia sort of in Scots, right? So there's Wikipedia in different languages, and obviously Wikipedia is sort of it's held together by string and every single person who is using Wikipedia and inputting all the entries, right? It's not a company that has employees that do sort of that create all of the Wikipedia pages. And so someone took it upon themselves to translate a bunch of Wikipedia pages into Scots, but they didn't speak Scots. And so they were just kind of making it up by taking the English stuff and kind of changing it to being sort of written in a Scottish accent. And made up Scots words with some real Scots words thrown in there. And look, I don't speak Scots. I know some Scots because it's in Scotland. It's a part of sort of life there, right? Your grandparents will use some Scots.
Yeah. My granny spoke Scots.
Yeah, exactly, right. They'll use Scots here and there, and you pick up little bits here and there. And obviously, you've got your poetry and stuff that's in Scots that you do in school, and it's just unbelievable to me that someone would do that. That they would take this language and be like, I'm going to make it up.
Like, they did it for so long, you have to assume that it was somehow done in good faith.
Yeah.
But, and then, of course, that comes across as a punchline, because, it is kind of funny, but also,
funny.
That's a minority language that's in danger, and that might have caused problems. Like, that might have been used to train machine learning models on the Scots language.
Oh God,
yeah.
There's a lot that could go wrong from that, and there's a lot of languages dying out because there aren't enough speakers anymore. Because English keeps coming in and going. You could just use this instead. More people will understand you.
Yeah.
If you're making a YouTube channel and you're in Iceland, you're going to make it in Icelandic. You're going to make it in English.
Yeah.
Well, everyone speaks English. This is what really bothers me. I don't speak any other language very well. I know some German. I can understand some Spanish if I stay there for 2 weeks and nobody speaks English to me. But I don't fully understand or speak any other language other than English. And it really bothers me because in the UK, we're very bad at teaching kids languages. You know, the way that we teach it in school is just very poor. It's not a good way to teach someone how to understand and speak a language.
I love the accent on poor there, by the way. That was
Very poor.
Very poor.
There's a whole separate area there. Sorry, carry on.
My mum's always on me about how poor, and poor are the same in English, and she's Scottish, and she's like, it's poor, and poor.
Wait,
There's
poor, and what's the third one?
So you got like a paw of a cat, you've got to paw something, and you've got like poor being poor.
Yeah, poor, and well, actually in Scots you can have either poor or poor.
Yeah.
To mean.
And there's
to
the
pour
pores on
something
your
out.
skin as well.
Oh, and a pour, yeah.
Great. It's like
English,
there, and
it's
there.
a great language.
We'll get into this.
This
in
is
a
what
bit,
you were talking
but
about before I interrupted you by pointing out a word you said. Again, linguist. Sorry.
Don't worry. Look, it's all good for the episode, right? I mean, it's really interesting the way that, you know, we don't really get taught languages in school very well, but then we don't need to. You can just be lazy as an English person or an English speaking person, and that bothers me to another degree because then the rest of the world looks at us and they're like, "Oh, you're lazy. You don't care. You don't bother to learn other languages." And yes, but also it's really, really hard for us to do it unless we take sort of, you know, unless we take it upon ourselves to find a way personally of learning those languages. Whereas in a ton of other countries, you just learn English in school, alongside, you know, your native language.
It always astounds me in other countries where to have literally like a service job, like to work in a cafe. Which we as a culture don't pay very well. We don't reward that kind of work very well. You have to speak like 3 languages in some countries just to have a cafe job or a bar job, which we would consider a job which isn't paid well. But you have to have like a way. I wouldn't be able to get that job. I wouldn't be able to, like, I do not have the skill set to have that job in another country, and yet we pay those people so poorly.
If you're doing any public-facing work for the Canadian government, I mean, Quebec aside, but you've got to be bilingual. You go into Canada and you go up to the border, the first thing you will hear is hello, bonjour, or bonjour, hello, which is kind of this establishing phrase that says, I speak both languages, which one would you like? And the way you'll say either bonjour or hello back, and that is kind of the shibboleth that says, all right, this is what we're going to speak for this interaction.
That's so interesting.
I think one of the big differences about whether a country is English by default as a second language is whether they have subtitles or dubbing on their media. So
that's a good one.
France, everything is translated. It's got a rich internal media that produces television shows and movies and songs. There's plenty of French language radio. You don't need to speak English to understand the pop culture in that country. Same with Germany. Big internal media, everything's dubbed. Same with Italy. But you go to the Nordic countries, you go to Norway, Sweden, Finland, all subtitled. Because the market isn't quite big enough. You go to Iceland, 100% subtitles except for kids' media. They just don't have the budget to dub everything. So if you want to understand pop culture in that country, yeah, you might be reading the subtitles, but you're going to be hearing the English all the way through.
I just have a quick anecdote about Iceland, which you may leave in, may not. I'm not sure about translation in Iceland. So I have a friend who is a theatre director, and like the bread and butter of his job is he takes Western, probably American and London shows and puts them on in Iceland, and they do in this case they translate them. And he was doing, what's the song that's like Step in Time? Is that
that is Step in Time from Mary Poppins.
Step in Time from Mary Poppins. That's it. Anyway, so one thing they get when they're doing the translations is he, as the director, gets the original English script, he gets the translated Iceland script, and then he gets the Iceland script translated back to English.
Yes.
just so that he can check the translation, right? And he hadn't received this yet, and he was doing the rehearsals, and I don't think he speaks perfect Icelandic, and so he was rehearsing Mary Poppins with the cast, and he asked them, like, just before I get the script, how is the translation? Is it good? And all the cast are like, yeah, it's great. And they're doing the song Step in Time, and then he finally gets the book of the translations, and it turns out that they've translated step to pavement.
Oh.
Because of the step that you take from the road to the pavement.
Yeah.
And the entire cast is singing da, 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 pavement in time, da, 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 pavement in time. And they did not realize, and that was like several weeks of rehearsals.
You wouldn't necessarily realize, though, right? If it makes some degree of sense on its own.
Translating is a very difficult thing, particularly for songs and music. If you've ever seen, like Disney translate into so many languages for their kids' films. Like, kids' media does get translated, because I think there's a lot of government push that the kids are not going to grow up just learning English.
Yeah.
But translating a song, you can change the whole meaning. If you ever see there's multi-language edits of Frozen out there on YouTube.
Yeah.
The big songs. And the meaning of the big song of Let It Go is not literally translated in nearly every language, because you need a 3-syllable phrase that's really catchy and sums up the meaning of what's going on, not the exact words. You can change all the words of that song as long as the meaning is there.
I feel like when it comes to songs and that sort of area of translation, it really, really highlights the two sort of major ways of translating something. Either translating something literally, and then you have mistakes like this sort of pavement instead of step, or translating the meaning, in which case you then potentially lose some of the specific nuance of actual
language. You have the concept of translation and transcreation, which is a term for just, we're making the same thing, but a bit different. We're adapting the... I believe, again, I'm hedging my bets here, Spain has gained some new swear words over the last 40, 50 years, because English media started translating phrases like son of a bitch, literally, word for word.
Amazing.
So that started appearing in Spanish-speaking media, and that curse got picked up. I am sure it's more nuanced than that, by the way, but I'm pretty sure that's happened in a couple of languages.
I'll say this. When it comes to Spanish, they are, I think, better at swearing than any other language. I had so many Spanish friends in uni, and the way that they are able to swear is just beautiful. I would genuinely recommend learning Spanish just to be able to use those naughty words, honestly.
The flip side of that is that every European country understands the F word. Like, just every single European country can just drop an F-bomb into their own language. There doesn't seem to be a replacement for it in any other language. It's great.
I think it is the perfect swear word. I mean, I'm sure there are plenty of studies on why it is so good, but it is, I think, the perfect just utilitarian swear. You can use it for anything in any context. You can replace any kind of word with the F word, and it works.
I'd love to know the linguistic study of swear words and why.
I mean, there's a lovely one called expletive infixation.
Wow.
You can say abso-bloody-lutely.
Oh, yeah.
You can't say absolute-bloody... No.
Absolutely.
No, it's got to go in that position.
Yeah.
And everyone knows what position that is.
Yeah.
Despite the fact we definitely never got taught that in school.
That reminds me of this Tumblr post that was going around that said, you realize there's an order to sort of adjectives. There's an order to how you describe something. I can't remember the exact order.
I remember this post.
And we all sort of almost innately know that you can say, that's I guess a big green house or a big blue house or something. But a green big house sounds weird.
It's wrong.
It sounds off, right? And there is an order to all of these things, and you can change it in sort of certain circumstances. But we all know this order. But if you say, look, write down the order in which you use these different kinds of adjectives, you'd be like, Corey, what are you saying?
It's different in different languages.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm talking specifically about English. Yeah.
I'm writing a film at the moment where one of the main characters is not native English speaking. And one of the things I enjoy is thinking about basically playing with what the word order would be in their native language. And then, because that's a really, because you have characters whose language is for want of a better example, it's not a good example, but Borat, right?
Yeah.
There is a like a syntax to the way Borat speaks. I don't know if it's actually based on real Kazakhstani.
I somehow doubt it.
Yes. Well, I think you're probably right. But there is a way of changing word orders which sounds like you're speaking from certain parts of the world.
Yeah.
And whether that may be completely a misconception of those languages, but that's one of the ways you can denote someone whose English is a second language is by just very subtly changing the word order. Not because you're saying they're stupid, because it's the second language, so it's fine, but because it just adds some flavor to a character.
Well, it's like French. So this is one that sticks with me. When we were in primary school, I remember being taught this, that in French, I think the adjective comes after the noun. So you wouldn't say the blue pen, you'd say the pen blue, which makes some degree of sense, because if you're, say, looking for something, I'm looking for my pen blue, you're like, oh, pen, that's what you're looking for. Blue is the description that makes sense that it comes afterwards, because that's the sort of less important part. So if a French person is speaking English, they might say, oh yeah, pen blue. I've never heard a French person say that, because I usually hear them speak French. But, you know,
I'm not sure they would, because one of the things that linguistics studies is that sort of second language errors.
Yeah.
And there are certain things that are easy and certain things that aren't. And I feel like in the same way that you would have learned in primary school that it would have been pen rouge.
Yeah.
Is it pen? What the hell's the French word for pen?
Stylo.
Stylo. Un stylo rouge. That sounds right. Un rouge stylo does like the nothing's right there.
Sorry, you say that. I have not studied French since genuinely, I think, high school or primary school, and that sounds fine to me.
But I'm with you, Tom. I would definitely say un stylo rouge, and I wouldn't be able to tell you why, but it's just so ingrained that I wouldn't make that mistake. Even if I spoke, well, as I do speak incredibly bad French, I wouldn't make that mistake. That type of word order stuff is so ingrained, it's so basic that it's stuck in there.
Whereas the stress pattern is something that's way more subtle that you don't get taught in school. So English, you have this complicated pattern of stress. You say words and they can land in the middle of sentences or syllables, and there's this rhythm to it.
Yeah.
French, the stressed syllable is the one at the end of the utterance. That's the rule. I mean, obviously, there are small exceptions and things like that. But if you want to sound French, you put emphasis at the end of what you say.
Ooh.
And the only thing I changed there was my stress pattern. I didn't put the accent on, but it sounded way more French.
It did.
Because I put the stress at the end
of what I say.
That is putting the accent on.
Sorry, I was just meaning to do an accent there. But it's just...
But that's one of the subtle things you don't get taught, and which really would make you sound... If you use an English stress pattern in French... Yeah, you're going to get flagged immediately. It's the equivalent of the guy from The Great Escape saying "good luck." You just need to get spotted.
Yeah,
neither of you got that reference. Never mind.
No.
No. I was running through my brain. I was like, "Great escape, great escape, great escape."
No. Never mind.
Is it Bon Chance?
Does he jumping the motorbike over the fence?
Is it the 1963 war action film set during the Second World War?
Very, very quickly Googled. Well, no, there's a famous. Actually, the reference that would get you as the equivalent would be the 3 from Inglourious Basterds.
Oh yeah,
okay,
yeah. That's very good.
Which is basically the same gag as a German officer spotting an escaping British prisoner of war. By having a fluent conversation in German, him getting away with it, and then just he turns away and says, "Good luck," and the guy just turns around and goes, "Oh, thank you." Oh, I've been spotted. And it's basically the same gag.
You know, it's like sitting having a conversation in English, you know, with someone completely fluently, and when they get up to leave, they don't slap their lap and say, "Well." Yeah, that's it. You're done. I know you're not a native English speaker now. Ding-a-ling-ling, is that the ad bell?
Hark the ad bell, he does sing.
He sings for Patreon, I think. If you head over to our Patreon at patreon.com/SCI GUYS, you can get a whole host of cool things. What can they get, Luke?
Oh, bloomin' heck. They can get so many things. There's bonus episodes. You can request topics for episodes. There's an entire other show called After Dark where we discuss sort of philosophical things and just general discussion, the kind of stuff that you imagine we talk about after we've finished recording. Well, that is when we do it, so that is what we do. And lots of other stuff. What else is there?
You get your name at the end of every single SCI Guys episode. You can also vote on topics. You get to choose what we do. And at the end of the episode that's voted on by our patrons, if it's your first month being a patron, you get thanked by name by us, the SCI Guys. Isn't that fun?
That is really fun. I'll use my vocal cords to say your name with a 50% probability because Corey says half of them.
That's very true. So head to our Patreon at patreon.com/SCI Guys. Okay. Linguistics, right? I wanted to do an overview of the of the study and just
good luck. What you've got is a series of short, brief anecdotes. That's all I can remember from my degree. Yeah,
I wanted to do a basic overview so that people could, understand broadly what linguistics is, and I think that what we've done thus far is probably the best way of showing people what is cool about linguistics. By which I mean you can have several conversations jumping off from just the basic topics of linguistics. And you know a lot of this stuff already. You just don't know necessarily that it's linguistics.
Yeah, it's an amazing study.
Your first year of a linguistics degree is going through and going, and just finding out things that you didn't know you knew. And then it's drilling down and finding the areas that you want to study and you want to take forward. So I did a lot of syntax and semantics, the word order, how sentences and thoughts are made up and connected. What I didn't cover was child language acquisition. What I didn't cover was psycholinguistics. I didn't cover vocalizations and phonetics. I didn't cover the wet stuff, basically. I covered sort of computational linguistics and the analysis and the diagramming of things, because that's the way my brain works. There were other people who were just happily working on child language acquisition, second language acquisition, all the messy qualitative stuff. Whereas I was trying to put numbers on things.
Yeah, I wanted to ask actually, would linguistics cover something like eye contact and the meaning behind different eye contacts? Like almost like that TikTok. I don't know if you saw that TikTok where it's like women describing the two different types of eye contact when they're talking to a man.
Oh yeah.
One that's like, get me out of here, and one that's like, hey, this is going well. And I find that so fascinating. Does it cover things like eye contact?
Yeah, I think that's paralinguistics.
Right.
So it's sort of sitting on the fringes of, like, it's absolutely a part of it. Eye contact's a part of it. Gestures are a part of it. Everything to do with tone and body position and language is all part of that as well. Because
it comes back to what we were talking about, the sort of the changing language around, like, having to do things like Zoom. I know that there are some platforms, I know that Apple were developing this at one point, where they're trying to use AI to make it so that you look into the lens.
I think Apple have that.
And we were having a conversation with Tom before we started the podcast about where do I look so that it feels natural.
Do I look into the camera?
Yeah.
Do I look at the screen? Which feels natural for you? Which feels natural for you, the viewer?
Yeah.
There's all sorts of ways that can work. Also, I've just realised that when I gesture towards the camera, because this is a webcam, my hand looks really big.
Because you do.
It's old giant hand, Tom.
Because you spend so much time looking at...
it's Prince Charles's sausage fingers.
Prince Charles's sausage fingers!
If we didn't keep that earlier anecdote in, that's going to just be a really confusing reference.
I love a good chance to talk about Prince Charles's sausage fingers. It's probably like a health condition. I probably should stop being so mean.
Why don't we talk a little bit about the different sort of types of linguistics, or the different sort of areas of study, just broadly, really quickly. So I'll list them off in sort of increasing order of complexity, and then we'll go maybe a little bit more in depth.
Make some enemies here.
Well, when I say complexity, I don't mean that one is more difficult than the other. What I mean is the difference in sort of, I guess, scope and scale. So you'll understand what I mean once I get started. You've got phonetics, phonology, morphology, syntax, semantics, and pragmatics, broadly. Okay.
Very, very broadly.
Yeah, very
there
broadly,
are already multiple linguists angry at you.
Look, if I wasn't comfortable with making many scientists angry, I would have stopped this podcast a long, long time ago.
If they want to be angry, they should have invented better words.
So phonetics and phonology often get grouped together. That is the sounds and how they're produced. It's not usually how they're... It can be how they're heard. There's a little bit of that. That sort of goes more into psycholinguistics. But this is the flapping meat that you talk with, and for sign languages, the
basic
meat
handshakes
that you sign with.
Yeah.
This is how you get noises out of your body through the air to other people. A quick example of this.
Sorry.
If you just touch your throat just here to the sides. For people listening, this is going to be just to each side of your windpipe. And if you make a f sound.
A what sound?
F.
Oh.
Nothing happening there, right? Now make a sound. And you feel that vibration that's going on there.
Ooh.
So that's called voicing, and it's the difference between fine and vine, or sine and zine. That's not a word, but
Zine.
if you just keep your fingers there while you're talking, you'll feel that vibration turn on and off and on and off all the time as you speak. And that's your very basic phonetics, is how all those flappy bits of gristle combine to make this thing that you're hearing.
Yeah, sorry.
It's a really gross subject. Like, you get shown videos of singers and orators who've had cameras just positioned at just the right place so you can see stuff flapping about, and it's disgusting.
We were talking about this. I mean, we talk about this a lot, how it's so strange that we just flap some meat together by breathing out through it.
Yep.
And suddenly, you know, I can spin a wonderful tale that can make you laugh or cry by flapping my neck meats. Just flap some neck meats, flap some mouth meats, and you're, oh gosh, look, you're going to be
floor,
sobbing.
in a pile of my own tears.
Yeah, just quickly on phonetics and phonology. So what I meant was that these are sort of the smallest units, right? Like in as the individual sounds. And I wanted to quickly touch on the Ipa chart, so the International Phonetic Alphabet, because what you were just talking about there, Tom. I feel
I see what you mean by complexity. You're building up from the smallest units.
Exactly.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay.
So complexity in terms of building up from, say, like subatomic particles to atoms to to chemicals, all that sort of stuff.
Phoneticians work with like waveform analysis software. They'll be looking at pitches and formants and all the sounds to try and work out what's going on at a very, very close in level. So yes, you're absolutely right. You're talking about the atoms of language.
Exactly.
And this, incidentally, phonemes. This is how something like Siri works. Is it detects individual phonemes and then the order of the different phonemes and builds up an idea of what you're saying.
Do you want to?
Maybe these days it's magic artificial intelligence. No one knows how it works.
You're right. Now it won't be that. Maybe
I should say as well, there's a difference between a phone and a phoneme. I'm saying this because I learned
what?
I'm saying this because I learned it today and I want to sound smart.
And by a phone, you don't mean a phone.
I don't mean like a telephone. So
because obviously there's a difference between a phoneme and a telephone.
Yes, absolutely. Look, there's definitely a difference between those two things.
Subtle, but
although the word roots come from the same thing.
So a phoneme would be a sort of the sound that differentiates two different, I guess, words from each other. As far as I'm aware, that's my understanding. And a phone is just any of the individual sounds. So like schwa. Do you know what a schwa is? The schwa.
I always told it was schwa, ironically, because you're ending it with a schwa. It's the sound. It is the minimum possible vowel. If you speak English, I'm specifically not saying Welsh or Scottish or Northern Irish. Like, if you speak English, then you will generally reduce as many vowels as possible to schwa. I realise that as soon as I start talking about it, I start enunciating and I start really emphasising all my words. But if you just kind of speak like this, pretty much every vowel will just become a schwa. It's
It's supposedly the most common sound in English, or English, and I actually have a demonstration of it for you, not from myself, but from IPAchart.com, and this is linked below. It's so much fun. It shows the whole chart, and you can just click on them, and it makes the sounds. So here we go. Here it is.
It's that's the minimum vowel. Everything's kind of at rest. It's one of the easiest things. If you just kind of keep your mouth slack and make a noise with
I would say the easiest way to understand this is think about a teenager talking. That is the sound that they use the most often. Teenagers speak almost exclusively with this sound.
Me when my mum asks me to clean my room.
Sorry, I forgot that I had this.
So you have, in that sense, all the unstressed vowels tend to reduce down to schwa if they can. So you said mum. You didn't say like that's mum. It's
mum.
Tells me can't know.
Well, you say me. Tells me.
Me needs to be in there. Me's got a bit of stress in it, but you didn't say me to clean my room. You said me to clean I just completely
And
out of the way.
even-
Wasn't even necessary. Might even get reduced further. You might say me to clean.
Me
The
to
only reason
clean
that
my
schwa is
room.
there is because in English it's really difficult to go to ka.
Yeah, and room becomes rum.
It's
Not
longer,
one, but
yeah.
it's less than room. Rum.
Yes.
It's interesting because, between different accents as well, there are different, obviously we stress different vowels and different accents. So what yours is going to sort of, deconstruct into is not the same as what my accent is going to turn into.
I've often talked about how I feel like one of the things that denotes between English and Scottish is that it's almost like English versus Scottish swap some of the vowels. And it's probably not the vowels, it's probably these, schwa.
So what I found is that I always have people saying, "Oh, you're American." They meet me, they think, "Oh, you're an American person." I'm not American. I'm a Scottish person that's been living in England for about 7 or 8 years, and English people made fun of me, and so I had to change my accent. And what that meant was changing the vowel sounds, to being more English, but keeping all of the sort of more consonanty sounds still kind of Scottishy. And when you do that, you mix English vowel sounds with, I guess, the sort of rhotic Scottish R and other sort of sounds there, you get an American sounding accent. So English people wouldn't say car like I would, like a car. What you would say
Car.
but you add the R that I have to the end of that, and you have like an American car. Like, it sounds a little bit more American. And as soon as I figured that out, it made so much sense as to why everyone always reads me as American for seemingly no reason.
And that's why bullying is wrong. It turns Scottish people into Americans.
Yeah, but it also turns Luke into what he is today. So maybe...
Wow!
Oh my god, I'm so sorry, I'll cut that.
No, that's fine. It's amazingly accurate, actually. That can be the byline of my autobiography.
Ooh.
The subtitle.
And now therapy with Corey. Corey's not good at it, but we're doing it anyway.
So, quickly moving past that, we've done phonology and phonetics. We've touched on that. So I then mentioned morphology.
Yeah, so you put the phonemes together, you get morphemes, which are the minimum unit of meaning. So a phoneme is kind of the minimum unit of speech. A morpheme is the minimum unit of meaning. So you can say colder, and cold is a morpheme, and is a morpheme. They can get split down further into the sounds, but if you take apart co and lud, the meaning evaporates away.
So it's kind of like the study of, from what I've read, people were sort of saying, it's kind of like the study of words, and when you break down words, the individual constituents of meaning that make those up, and sort of the relationships between them and how they're formed.
So is the and colder a morpheme and a schwa?
Yeah, it's a schwa in English.
I'd say colder.
It's going to be, you will add a rhotic R on the end of it, Corey, I'm guessing.
Yeah, colder.
Colder.
So if I say colder, that does it. That sounds like, that's like I'm saying cold, like, there's not even a single, I can't think of a single word that ends like that,
The canonical example for morphemes would be anti-disestablishmentarianism.
Yeah.
Very good.
Which is one of those stupid long words that very rarely... I think it's the longest word that actually sees occasional academic use. But you can take that apart. You've got anti and dis. You've got establishment, which is in itself establish and meant. And then Aryan and then ism. So all those morphemes come together. And that is actually an academic word because there were there were disestablishmentarians, and then there was an anti-group to them, and then it gets an ism on the end.
Who aren't necessarily establishmentarians, right?
Right, I know. That's the reason. That's the reason. Like this horribly complicated academic word became this example. But all those different morphemes have a use. But you can't take an off the front of it. You can't split up anti.
T,
that's a morpheme.
This kind of is, I guess, tangentially related to... So there's this TV show called Young Justice. It's a DC cartoon. It's gonna be relevant, I promise. And a big theme throughout that, for some reason, is taking words like disaster and taking, basically taking off that sort of seeming suffix of, dis, and then saying, oh, feel the aster, because disaster is something that's bad. Dis as a sort of prefix, rather. Dis as a prefix means sort of, the opposite. So if anti-disestablishmentarianism, the dis sort of negates the establishmentarianism, right?
A lot of the comedy in the Office US is like, some of the comedy is like just taking the the first part of a word off and then making that into a joke.
Yeah. Yeah, but in this case, you've got words like disaster and stuff where they sound like they should, like aster should be the sort of the root word. And so aster should mean really good, or like overwhelmed.
Yes.
Oh, I'm overwhelmed. So if I'm whelmed, then I'm feeling good. No, whelmed actually means the same as overwhelmed.
Yeah, that's a perfect example of the Office thing as well. Like Michael Scott would be interviewed. I don't think this is an example necessarily, but it's a good example of the kind of thing. Michael Scott might be interviewed and he would say, some people say that this afternoon was a disaster, but actually I like to look at it as an aster.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
And I think it's really interesting because why isn't that the case? I mean, if you look into it, it's because the root word is not sort of aster, it's something else. But that's usually the case. But it's still really interesting to see how, you know, words can almost through convergent evolution become very similar to each other despite having completely different origins, you know?
I mean, Britain has been invaded so many times over so many centuries and had so many other languages appear that, yeah, we've got words that feel like they should be related, but just aren't.
Was it not a Terry Pratchett quote, or something similar, wherein, I'm going to paraphrase here, you know, English, it doesn't have a grammar system of its own. English, it sits in a sort of dark alley waiting for languages to come past and mugs them and steals a stray grammar from his pockets.
Yep.
I love that. I love
Absolutely.
that. I love that. So I think that's morphology. Do we understand that?
Yeah.
Yeah. Then syntax. Syntax, I think, is sentences, right? And Tom, you said that was sort of your...
Yeah, that was the area I went into. So syntax, so semantics is meaning. That's your big picture stuff. Syntax is like that example of how of the order words can go in. It's how words can fit together and frequently how they can't fit together. You know, a linguist will work out, well, hang on, why can't you do that? What's the rule there? What does that say about the brain? What does that say about how we teach computers to speak? Why do we have these rules? Where have they come from? What do they do?
I think that's really interesting because we don't think about where those rules come from. I feel like when we're taught English in school, or we're taught languages in school, we're taught the rules. Here are the rules of this language. Who made up those rules? Because people at some point started talking to each other and doing paintings on a wall, and then, many years later, you've got people sitting in an English class learning English. Who made up the rules? You know, why do those rules exist? And there are also different rules in different languages. It's very weird to think that there are such strong rules and not a single person has sat down and just made them up. We've just kind of fallen into them. Very good area of study.
I thought so. Can't remember any of it 15 years later, mate.
So then we've got sort of semantics and pragmatics, and I want to kind of group those together because, as you said, semantics is the study of meaning. And that, as far as I'm aware, is more sort of literal meaning, so not looking into sort of metaphor and the social context.
That's
just
literature.
The literal, yeah.
That's literature.
And apparently pragmatics is the sort of, I guess, then more complex, version of semantics, wherein you're taking semantics, that sort of literal thing, and then you're taking into account sort of social context and metaphor. And I'm not entirely sure, what linguists are doing in that sort of area, what sort of separates it from, as you say, sort of like literature. Yeah. I've got a quote here, and it says, it is sometimes defined in contrast with linguistic semantics. This is obviously talking about pragmatics. It's sometimes defined in contrast with linguistic semantics, which can be described as the study of the rule systems that determine the literal meanings of linguistic expressions. Pragmatics is then the study of how both literal and non-literal aspects of communicated linguistic meaning are determined by principles that refer to the physical or social context in which language is used.
Right. Ooh. Sorry, that was me doing the exact example. The joke just didn't land.
I thought we'd hit a sore spot.
Horrifying.
Yeah, no, sorry. That was just... I thought that joke might land. It didn't.
It landed so well that we were terrified.
That is the canonical example of it is a linguist saying... The canonical example of it is a speaker saying, there's no language in which a double negative can mean a positive or something like that. And just, yeah, right. Because you've got two words that both agree, but the tone, the way it's spoken, everything like that, it's clear there is an additional level of meaning there. And that's your pragmatics.
I felt like I just got an insight into what it would be like to fall out with Tom Scott.
Didn't like it. I didn't like it at all. Wasn't fun.
It's quite triggering. Like I have a past life where we argued.
They can't all be winners, never mind.
What you're saying there is, it reminds me of something that I see cropping up so often. It's the yeah, no, and no, yeah.
Yeah.
Every now and then, someone will say, oh, you know what? Normal people say yes and no. People from my area that I'm from say no, yeah, and yeah, no. Where no, yeah means yeah, and yeah, no means no. And every now and then, someone will think that that is unique to their sort of area that they've grown up in. Like, people in Colorado say this. People across the world say that, and they speak English. This is just a very normal part of English language for some reason.
I'm not certain whether this is an example of it, but you know when you're like worried about a conversation you have to have, so you rehearse it in your brain.
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah.
You all have this sometimes? Anyway, so I was rehearsing this.
I think there's a Nathan Fielder show about that.
But I was having this experience, and the phrase that kept coming up in my head was, it's not untrue that. Is that an example of this?
Yeah,
because it's
perfect.
It's a double negative to say, it's a way of saying it is true that this thing, but
the meaning is very different.
So different,
isn't it?
It is a very different meaning, yeah. Because it's almost like if I was to assert something to be true, then it has to be true to quite a large threshold. Mm-hmm. Whereas if something's not untrue, the threshold feels smaller for that thing to be true.
You are grudgingly accepting that the thing is true. Yeah, it's not untrue that. And also, that only works written down. Out loud, that sounds like you're doing a really formal debate. It doesn't really work.
I was going to say...
that's every conversation I have, Tom.
Very one-sided, but, you know...
With myself, mostly, yes.
But I
10
think
times over, seeing all the different outcomes.
Yeah.
I find that politicians and scientists are the two kinds of people I think that are most adept at using that kind of language, where... they say something that sounds as though, oh yeah, it's not untrue that, you know, so therefore it is true that, but that's not what they're saying.
There's a brilliant word in Norwegian called Hasker Technique. I don't know if you've heard of this before. It might fall under linguistics, maybe not. No, it probably isn't linguistics, in which case I apologize. But it's great anyway, so I wanted to bring it up. So Hasker Technique is basically strategies for winning an argument that have nothing to do with you being correct. And the reason it came up is because you were talking about
politics. I think the English word for that is diplomacy.
But it translates to domination tactics, which is basically like, so Tom, if I and you were having a conversation, and you cited some book. Say, for example, you cited the encyclopedia or the dictionary as grounds for you being correct because I'm using a word in a wrong way, and then I would, for example, a Hasker technique I could use, which was actually called out in my specific the way that I found out about this was called out by the author of the book Hasker Technique in Norway. I could go, but Tom, have you read the entire dictionary? And you would go, well, no one's read you don't read the entire and I'd go, oh, okay.
We have a similar concept in English.
Fine, I guess. Don't worry. But then somebody, and in this case, this was a boring legislative book with loads of examples. That there's a reference text that no one would ever read the entirety of. And then the author of the book, Hasker Technique, happened to be present for this conversation, and then stepped in and went, "Have you read the book?" And the person having this argument was like, "No, actually, I haven't." And the Hasker Technique was dismantled.
It sounds like very similar to the concept of just a fallacy in English when it comes to debate. You know, there's all of these different fallacies that you can use. So there's the slippery slope fallacy. That's one that people use often. Where it's like, well, first the gays are marrying, then what? They marry dogs and toasters, and and then next thing you know, the Earth is marrying the sun, and we're all dead. Like
the Earth is already married to the sun. Let's be honest.
It's in a poly relationship. Yes, absolutely. But you know what I mean? Like there are so many ways. There are so many ways of just using language to be correct without having to actually be correct, and that is, I think, a cornerstone of debate. Which is why it winds me up to almost no end that people will constantly be like, "Oh, you disagree with this? Debate." Well, that's not a way. That's not a way to prove who's right. It's a way to prove who is very good at debating and who is less good at debating. I mean, if you're both equally good, then it can prove who's right. But debate isn't, you know, this sort of, I mean, this perfect tool of finding truth, because it's based upon language which can be sort of played with and manipulated, you know?
Upload this as a YouTube short called Corey Dismantles Western Democracy in 30 seconds.
I've already uploaded this exact short to my other channels.
Okay.
We've kind of covered, I'm not going to say all of linguistics or a lot of linguistics. We've barely even scratched the surface, but I feel like we've done a very good sort of...
Wrong. I have a degree now.
Oh, great. Fantastic. Good for you. Well done.
So does Tom. Tom has a second degree.
Tom is now a doctor of linguistics.
Yeah.
Well done. Congratulations. I want to kind of quickly touch on one main question. And either of you can answer this. I don't know the answer, so, go for it. What is a language?
It's a dialect with an army and a navy.
Oh, are you kidding me? I literally have this exact quote.
And I'm literally quoting it back at you because it's the best example I've ever found.
Oh my gosh.
That's brilliant.
Do you want to explain what you mean by that? Or what Max Weinreich means by that?
Yeah, so there are a lot of languages that are very close to each other. And there are a lot of dialects that, honestly, it's really difficult to have mutual intelligibility. And it's basically down to, does a government describe this as a language rather than as a dialect of another? It's a really fuzzy distinction between the two.
Which is super interesting. If you look at sort of Chinese, so we think of Chinese as a language, but actually Mandarin and Cantonese, you can't really understand. They have the same sort of, I think, writing system, but someone speaking Cantonese cannot necessarily understand someone that's speaking Mandarin because they just don't interact that way. They're not sort of mutually intelligible. You can't understand one while speaking the other.
That's so interesting, actually, because when you were talking about the stuff about France, about like France compelling certain words and certain uses of words and compelling government to use certain words, that to me sounded almost like nationalistic, like trying to impose the continuation of a culture rather than letting culture just naturally evolve. But by that definition, that sort of actually part of the definition of a language is it's almost relative to a government ordaining it as a language, and so it's not too much of a step to sort of start imposing certain aspects of a language if you're a government with an army.
Well, you say that though, and I've just got back from the US, and in the South, especially of the US, there's so much Spanish. It's basically bilingual, right? And in some places, I've seen signs that are just in Spanish, and there's not anything in English. So this was sort of California, Texas, all of those states down there. And yet, I don't think the US has an official language, right? It doesn't have an official language. But if it were to have an official language, by the standards of the number of people that speak it and the number of signs and whatnot are in Spanish and English, the US is essentially a bilingual country. But they don't have an official language, so they're not officially bilingual, but they essentially are, right? And it's weird because we usually think of the United States of America being an English-speaking country, when in reality, if you actually go there and you interact with people that live there, that's not really necessarily the case.
Yeah, similar with, I just went to Brussels in Belgium, Belgium, and it has 3 official languages and 3 different areas of the country that speak different languages. And the guy I was with, who was sort of touring me around Brussels, was telling me that they sort of operate like close. They could become 3 different countries. If there wasn't this unifying thing keeping them together, they don't really get on. They don't really like each other. They speak different languages. They could sort of become part of, I think, Germany and France. I forget where Belgium is on the map. But Brussels could sort of be one thing, and then these 2 other sections could basically be they could either be their own countries or merge into. Now, there may be people in Belgium who completely disagree with me, but this was sort of the idea. Like it not something that we have in Britain, where we actually are 3 or 4 countries sort of joined together in a union, and we are officially separate countries, but we sort of operate as one country. Well, these are officially one country. Begrudgingly, to a certain extent, operating as different countries because they have different languages, and depending on where you are, you have to speak a different language.
Oh, I mean, we operate as one country in the UK begrudgingly.
Oh, well, yes.
Some of us do.
Yes. Not officially. Officially, the majority does not operate begrudgingly.
Absolutely.
Oh God, we're getting into dangerous territory.
But language is political. Linguistics is political because everything that we do has to be described somewhere. So even if you're talking about what are meant to be the dry parts, about computational linguistics, about syntax, things like that, at some point, you're going to start talking about political stuff because you're going to start talking about real people. It's not like you're going to be studying physics and deep atomic structures that don't affect most people's everyday lives. We all use language. So ultimately, you're studying linguistics, you're studying everyone.
Wow. I think that is the best place to end that.
Absolutely. Very good.
And so now...
You've done this before.
And so now it seemed that it would be time for a quickfire quiz.
Dun, 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 dun. Linguistics edition.
Very good.
Oh boy, I'm in trouble.
You're in less trouble than me, Tom.
So the rules for the quickfire quiz are the same as always. I will ask one question. That's one question between the two of you. The first person to buzz in with the correct answer after I finish asking the question wins. And what do they win, Luke?
Nothing at all.
You're gosh darned right. So, Luke, what is your buzzer? Very good. And Tom, what is your buzzer?
Solid buzzer.
Amazing.
Solid buzzer.
Amazing. So, the question for you is, what is the most common sound in English? Yes, Luke. Yes, Luke.
Hooray! Yes.
Congrats. Tom, if you want a bonus point, can you name the sound that Luke just made?
That's the schwa. We talked about it earlier.
Exactly.
You should probably have a backup question
Points
for
all
this.
around. Everybody wins nothing.
Well done. Okay, well, thank you very much for joining us, Tom. Is there anywhere
thank you
that
so
anyone
much.
can find you?
Yes. Yeah, I'm ending on a Grice's Maxims joke. There you go. Good luck, that's all you get.
Okay, well, before we go, we would like to thank all of our patrons with a very special thank you to executive producers Donito and Glitchrabbit, and thank you for watching. You can find the full references for this episode in the description. Subscribe for new episodes every Sunday, and why not leave us a nice wee comment? You can support the pod at patreon.com/SciGuys, or you can find and contact us at SciGuysPod on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube, and at SciGuys on TikTok too. Or you can send us an email at sciguyspod@gmail.com.
That's sciguyspod@gmail.com.
Tom doesn't. At gmail.com.
That'll do.
You can follow me at Not Corey everywhere.
You can follow me at Luke Cutforth everywhere.
I thought you were done. Sorry, I was just adding the scream to end the show. Never mind.
You can find Tom.
You can find Tom somewhere.
Yeah, you can.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.